Welcome to Black Hat Windows 2K Security, held February 14th through the 15th, 2001 in Las Vegas, Nevada. The following videotape was recorded live at the conference and produced by the Sound of Knowledge Incorporated. This is videotape number 9, Technical Track, Remote Web Application Disassembly with ODBC Error Messages.
We'll start with the speech. Okay, brief introductions first off. Welcome, we've already been there. My name is David Litchfield and this is Mark Litchfield, my brother. We both work for At Stake out of the UK office. Today we're going to talk about remote web application disassembly through ODBC error messages. We're going to cover what the basic issue is, what web application disassembly is all about, then go on to certain issues with temporary stored procedures on Microsoft SQL Server, and then risk prevention. How are we going to stop all of these attacks? So, moving on, what is SQL? SQL stands for Structured Query Language. It's the language that basically allows us to communicate with database servers. It has a simple format. We will get to that shortly. For example, we have at the bottom on my right-hand side of the screen, select a star from table where name equals string. That's an example of a simple SQL query. Now, hopefully you can see, and it's not too bad. Round here, this is a user-supplied string basically, and it's embedded in single quotes. So strings are embedded in single quotes in SQL. Now, that's crucial to our talk. So what we have here is a simple setup, and I'm sure we're having some technical difficulties at the moment on my left. We're going to have, my laptop here is a web server, essentially. We have a client on my left. We're running Internet Information Server with an ASP application, which feeds into a SQL server. Now, it just so happens the SQL server is on the same boxes as the Internet Information Server. Often you'll find them separated, although in terms of what we're going to do here today, it doesn't make a difference. As long as the IIS box is using an ASP application feeding into feeding into SQL Server. So
those plugs are all pretty loose. Yeah, the thing's just totally died on me. This power button's not even working.
Okay, we can make a... Okay, so today we have a client here as well as the server. So let's look at a SQL query. Select star from table where name equals foo. If we were to enter from a login page, let's go to this. Okay, simple login page, welcome to paper.inc, please log in. If we entered a single quote here and logged in, or attempted to, we would get an ODBC error message back saying there was an unclosed quotation mark before the character string and password. We'll come to that and password shortly, but just note we have an ODBC error message back. This tells us a number of things. One, we can basically insert our own SQL queries, and I'll get into that more later on, but let me explain why. Imagine we have the ASP application that for the login page says select star from table users where username equals foo and password equals bar. That would populate a record set which the ASP application would then read through looking to see if it's actually been populated or not. Now, if we actually, as we've just done, entered a single quote, what we have now is select star from table where name equals single quote FO, single quote O, single quote. So that is not actually valid SQL, and that's going to churn out this error message that we've received, unclosed single quote. What we can do after we have entered our single quote in there is place an arbitrary SQL query of our choosing. For example, select star from table 2. Now, at the end, you'll be able to see here, we have tacked on a minus minus. that basically tells Microsoft SQL Server that everything thereafter is a comment, so just ignore it. So if we were to do this time, we would not get an error message churned out. So web application disassembly. What's it all about? We're going to look at this login page, work out from the ODBC error messages the actual structure of the database behind the web server. We're going to learn table names, columns, the data types that are expected by those columns. So let's start. First off, and you'll have to excuse the switching between the two, we've entered a single quote. Now, as you can see, this part here, where it says unclosed quotation mark before the character string and password, that's actually given us a slight portion of the ASP. It's telling us that our user ID and password is being inserted into a SQL query, basically, and by actually putting the single quote in, it's screwed the actual query. So we're actually getting revealed part of the query that's going across to the SQL server. So, and password. Now, we can make the assumption that they are saying select star from table where user ID equals foo and password equals bar. So, and this verifies this by the fact that there's and password. So now we know password. When you select something from a table, where, with a conditional where, you say where username and password is X and Y. So the username and password, as in this password here, is actually a column within the table. Now, because we're disassembling the application, this is our first stage. We've now got a column name within the table. We still don't know what the table is, and we don't know anything else other than that we have a column name, which is password. So using that, we can then actually start evaluating the rest of the column names. So we would say single quote, group by bracket password. Minus minus. Remember, minus minus cuts off the edge. Actually, before we even get that far, I'm going to show you a simple login page. Then we'll go to a more complex login page, and this is why we'll need to disassemble the application. If we wanted to go and log in here, basically this is just doing a select star from table where user is foo and password is bar. That would populate the record set if the user entered correct information, and we would be logged in. So just showing the site quickly, if we logged in as Mark with a password of passwd, we're taken to the welcome login successful page. If, however, we entered incorrect information, such as foo and bar, we would get, oops, login failed, click here to log in again. So we follow that. Now, this kind of login page is easy to bypass. Simple quote, yeah, single quote, which can now allow us to bed our own arbitrary SQL. So if we assume that they're saying select star from table where username equals foo, what we can say is single quote or 1 equals 1, which is always going to evaluate to true. So the condition is always true and the record set is actually populated. So we say or 1 equals 1 minus minus, and as you can see, that's taken us to welcome login successful. Explaining that again, our query that's going to the from the web server to the SQL server is select star from table where username equals whatever the user enters and password whatever the user enters. But by chopping off the rest with the minus minus, our SQL query now goes across as select star from table where username equals single quote, or 1 equals 1. And of course, or 1 equals 1 is always going to evaluate to true, so our record set is populated. If, on the other hand, we had a slightly more complex login page, essentially welcome2.asp does exactly the same, although once the person has logged in, they then do an update. It's an audit trail, basically. After this person's logged in, update this particular table and say, this user logged in at this particular time, and here was his user ID, here was his password. So if we try it here, or 1 equals 1, minus minus, we actually get this error message back. Now, when you play with SQL enough, when you see incorrect syntax near the keyword or, that tells us there's something fundamentally wrong with our SQL statement. So, as I said, when you do it enough, we can generally guess that they're probably doing either an update or an exec, because a conditional statement is not acceptable in an update or an exec stored procedure, basically. So we know something is going wrong, and we can't use this simple technique to actually get access to the restricted site. So we're going to have to disassemble the application. And so let's start. We enter our single quote here. And we get this error message we've already seen back, which says unclosed quotation mark before the character string and password. As I said earlier, that's given us a tiny portion of the whole application. And this is our foothold. This is where we're going to start disassembling the application. As I said earlier, we're going to work out table names, column names, and the data types expected by those. So using the and password, we simply say group by password. Now, group by is used when playing around with aggregates and stuff. And this will actually cause an ODBC error message that will come out. Column tbl users.username is invalid in the select list because it is not contained in either an aggregate function or the group by clause. So, as you can see here, we have tuple users. That tells us it's the table name, which is crucial. If we're going to be creating our own account, and at the end of the day, that's what we're going to be doing to actually log into this site, we have the table name, and what's more, here, we have a second column name. We can basically iterate through the whole of this table now, substituting like password with username and so on until we have basically evaluated every single column name rather, in this table. So we have now column names and, crucially, the table name. Once we have, sure, go ahead.
Do you mind increasing the font size on your browser?
Could you tell me how?
Tools.
Tools.
Text size. No.
I'm not an IE man. Whereabouts, sorry? Oh, fonts, yeah, of course. Can we change the size? Cancel from here? Sorry, could you? View. Right. Oh, yeah. Is that clearer? Okay, so
In the slide, or on the CD, do you have all this stuff on?
unfortunately, there is a white paper that came with this. This has basically just been put together. What I will do is make sure this goes up on the Black Hat site. So it's unfortunately not on the CD. So I'm going to switch between the two. We have catastrophic failure with this Micron PC over here. So I'm just going to have to switch between the two, unfortunately, at the moment. So it will be available.
Great.
Sure.
Can I just ask one brief question about the single quote? You say that the minus is that specific to Microsoft SQL Server, or is that SQL in general?
Some SQL servers, it has meaning. Earlier versions of, for example, MySQL, comments were like a £, hash, yeah? But now I believe if you configure it in a certain way, it will support --. It really depends on the database server type.
And if we just switch the quoted identifier, we just change the logic on this side, right?
Correct.
Double, and then this
Exactly. So if the quote identifier was something else, instead of using a single quote, we would use whatever it was. Exactly. Correct. So we have group by. So single quote gives us the wee portion of the SQL statement that's going across from the web server to the Microsoft SQL server. Group by allows us to iterate through the table. It gives us the table name and allows us to iterate through the table, getting the other column names.
Another column name?
Unfortunately, I've only got 2 columns in this table. If you can't see clearly, I've got it more clear on here if you need some clarification. No? Cool. The next one would be, we need to work out the data type that it expects. For example, we would use compute sum. Now, sum requires an integer data type. So if we're supplying something which is, say, nvarchar data type or varchar data type, it's going to basically churn out another error message for us kindly. So, for example, if we put password in here, minus minus, we now get the error. Whoops. We now get the error. The sum or average aggregate operation cannot take nvarchar data type as an argument. So now we have the table name, the column name, and the data type it expects. Now, on large tables, unfortunately mine's only two columns big, you can iterate through the whole lot, working out what takes an int, what takes out an nvarchar, what takes time, and stuff like that. So we would basically do this, go through the whole lot, and jot this down on a bit of notepad. So once we have this information, obviously compute sum, I've just demonstrated, that's going to give us back the data type that it expects. So now we can go about creating an actual account for ourselves. We would use the insert SQL command to do this. We have the table name, insert into table users, the column names, username, password, values, let's say foo and bar. Now, before I actually do this, I'm going to go back and show you this logging in as foo and bar failing. So we say foo here, bar here, login failed, okay? Now, just check the syntax here, insert into table users, yep. Right, this will actually create an account called foo and bar for us. We get that error message, but if we go back here and now login successful, yeah? So we've actually disassembled their application and gone ahead and just created our own account. So imagine, you had to go through some lengthy process before these guys would even give you an account. Well, we've just done one in about 5 minutes. So this is certainly a problem, and we'll get to actually solving issues like this shortly. That there is the string we would use to enter create our account. Obviously, for every column that existed in the table, we would do that, add that into our SQL query, and our account creation was successful. Now, the whole basic issue here is we can run arbitrary SQL queries. MS00048 actually talked about a problem whereby if you, as a normal user, created a temporary stored procedure, we could actually bypass permission checking and gain access to extended stored procedures or stored procedures that we had to be SA, in other words, super access or sysadmin, basically to get access. So we can actually bypass permission checking and gain access. Now, why is this a problem? XP_CMD shell. This basically gives us a remote shell prompt. Well, it's not interactive. Basically, we supply a command, but it will go off and run that command for us. Now, previously, there was no way to actually do this from a web server, and I'll show you why. If we tried the command create, remember we have the facility to be able to run arbitrary SQL queries, create proc. I say %23 here, by the way, simply because if I said hash, Internet Explorer would not pass that information on. It would translate it locally. So I say %23, Internet Explorer will pass that on as a hash sign. That's hex for a hash. And let's say our query is called AAA. Create procedure hash AAA as exec xp, actually we'll need to say master dot xp underscore cmd shell single quote dir single quote minus minus. This is going to give us an error message. Create procedure must be the first statement in a query batch. Damn, this beautiful bug is not going to allow us to do it, but of course there is a way to do it. So moving on, I'm going to demonstrate this bug in action actually. Let me just go to Query Analyzer. Query Analyzer is a simple tool that we would use to query SQL Server. So if I said, I'm logged in as a simple user, David, as you can see up here, that's the user login. Excuse me, sorry. Create proc hash as exec xp, actually, master dot xp underscore cmd shell dir. If we play that and then execute it, hash, what did I say? fkjkf. We get incorrect syntax. Oops, because I'm being silly. We get this message back saying, cannot add rows sys depends, fair enough, but if we then exec it, you can see we've got a directory listing. That's because we've created a temporary stored procedure, and SQL does not check permissions on temporary stored procedures. So we have our directory listing. Now, what I'm going to do and save typing is basically show you this. I'll break it down. Okay, we do exactly the same, yeah, but we're actually going to embed it, the create proc temporary procedure, within an execute statement itself. Moving down, let me see if I can put this in bigger text. Okay. So, can you guys see that over there? Yeah? Okay, so here we're saying execute, bracket, single quote, create proc hash foobar as exec master.xp underscore cmd shell, echo I was here. Yeah, and redirect that to default.asp. Note the placement of the single quotes. We have to have 2 here and 3 at the end, basically because execute bracket single quote requires, actually what we're executing requires lots of single quotes in it. So you just have to play around with the location of the single quotes until you get it right. So if I demonstrate this, remember that's our default page. Pressing enter here, refresh, and lo and behold, something failed. Let me just see why. Create proc foobar as execute master dot xp. I will say it should have done. Let me just put profiler on and just see if it got through. ENIAC, that is my local machine, so.
Right, but I think you maybe pasted it after you already had ENIAC, so ENIAC is in there twice at the beginning of the line? It was. Maybe it's not here now.
Execute create proc hash foobar as execute master echoes here. Let me just change the, I know what's wrong. I've already created a temporary stored procedure called that, and so that's going to fail. I think anyway, so let's go A there, and exec A there. Don't you just wish you had one of those like Muzak things, temporary failure of, you know, like dum 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 dum. Right, has anyone, whilst I get this working, has anyone got any questions at all?
Could you just put the main string up on
The which one?
the one that you're trying to get to work right now?
Sure.
So you're actually just redirecting the output to that file and overwriting the file?
Correct, yeah.
Is that a space after the exec between the...
Yeah, Internet Explorer should actually pad that out to a %20 when it gets sent across.
What sort of things will you see in the IIS logs or the SQL server logs?
These will actually be in there. You'll see my arbitrary SQL queries going across. It should be user ID, yeah. Was that username? No, user ID, yeah.
I'm fairly SQL ignorant, but I thought,
Sure.
I thought with this bug that's addressed with 00048, the stored procedure had to be owned by the DDO.
It does. XP_CMD shell is owned by SA, which is DBO. Now, I'm just wondering whether it's Internet Information Server caching the ASP page. Let me just... Nope. Well, what I'll do is continue for the minute. Query batch completed with errors.
Now,
I'll tell you what, I'll transplant that in and, sorry,
oh no, I was just saying, who would have write access on their group like that now?
too many people, unfortunately.
Really?
Yeah. I'm just doing it as a demonstration, so there's something visible, basically,
Okay, so the purpose is actually redirect the output.
to our file. Yeah. What I'm going to do is this will give me a if there's any error message coming back.
As a replace function if you want to take some time.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't have write access.
Maybe I don't have write access. Let me try that to a just a simple file. Foobar.txt. access is denied. I'm sorry? You know what I think I've done? I think I've installed the patch. The command notepad /foobar.txt. Yeah, okay, it's worked, finally. What I'll do, just to demonstrate this actually working via, is someone give me the name of a file.
Any file?
Any file, like foobar.txt on the root of the C drive, or I've just created. Actually, that was foobar.txt, yeah? So let's do that. It should now say I was here. Let me just write foobar.txt. I was here, yeah? So, sorry about that. I wonder if I've got default.asp open somewhere. So it's locked for exclusive use. Well, whatever reason anyway, let's move on. I'm sorry? I think one of these may have it locked.
I know I had caching issues, like you said.
Yeah.
With the web server will hold on.
Actually, as a good example of why this could be a problem. Yeah. So we could run any command we want here. For example, copy /winnt /system32 /cmd.exe to the scripts directory, and then we can, rather than playing with SQL queries, just have raw access. Sure.
Does it matter which volume you're on or which volume IIS is installed on?
Not really. For example, let's say the SQL box and the Internet Information Server box were on the same machine physically, but the IIS install was on the D drive, and say the scripts directory existed. I could just try copy cmd.exe to c:\inet pub scripts, and if it wasn't there, try d:\/ and e:, and once I've got cmd.exe there, you know, I don't need to do that because I've got access to a command prompt this way. This will, remember, give me access to a command prompt on the actual SQL server, not on the web server, unless they're actually sharing the same box. Doing it this way, all my commands will run as system, yeah? Copying cmd.exe to the scripts directory will run as IWAM or IUSR, that account.
Just a question.
Sure.
If we said that the create command couldn't work because it had to be the first command in batch.
Correct. If my arbitrary query was, for example, single quote, create proc hash foo as whatever, yeah, create proceed in a batch, a query batch. In other words, when you're running several queries together, they all have to be in a certain order. Now remember, we've already got the select star from table users where already. So our first in the batch is actually a select. We have no control over that. We can't edit the source. Because we've embedded it in an execute statement. Now, because execute, this create proc, yeah, is not a create proc, we can actually bypass that. So it's basically messing around with the order in which it's parsed. So temporary stored procedures, unfortunately what we see is too many people are like, well, we know they can't get to our web server, our SQL server through this way. And they don't apply this particular patch. So if you've got a SQL server with an Internet Information Server, an ASP application, apply this patch. It should go on because we can get access just by screwing with the SQL query. We can get access to it, as you've seen, even though it took me like.
So if SQL was on a separate box, your web server was on a separate box, you could really only penetrate SQL.
Correct, but that's often where the crown jewels are. See, if you've got a script kiddie, sure, he wants to deface your site because he's going to say, like, Elite Hacksaw was here, kind of thing, and he'll go around boasting to his friends, look, that was me, kind of thing. A determined attacker, someone who is, I don't know, involved in industrial espionage, they're not going over a defacement. They're looking for the crown jewels, which is actually in your database server. So risk prevention, what can we do? Okay, obviously the first port of call is the ASP application. Any user input, call replace on it. If it's string, if it's a string. For example, I will show you what I mean by that. This is the actual ASP code, okay? Now, here, we're requesting from the query string user ID, then calling replace. What in the other pages they failed to do is actually call replace, okay? So it's just pulling it directly from the query string, plonking it straight into the query, and that is packed off to the SQL Server. Instead, if we call replace and substitute a single quote with two single quotes, that therefore becomes valid SQL. So for every single quote they put in, if we put two in, there's not a problem, we're saved. We could simply, say, replace it with nothing, in other words, strip them out. The only difficulty with that is, if their name's O''Brian, you know, or if they want a strong password and they want a single quote in their password, stripping it out could cause issues. So sometimes it's best to replace it with two quotes. Sometimes it's best just to strip them out.
You could just parse it for certain keywords that are naughty too.
Well, it's the single quotes or the whatever they're using as the quote identifier. That's the danger. If they've got, well, actually, no, that's not true. If, for example, you had a specific query that did like, called select star from table, like, and then string. If we could embed percents in there or something, we could perhaps do weird stuff with that. So you may want to be careful of things like that. Anything which has meaning to the SQL Server, you might want to assess your risk. We're not using like statements, so we don't care about percent signs, you know. Or if you are, then you maybe want to validate, what's actually going through. If it's numeric, we don't actually have to play with quotes, by the way. We just simply say, for example, let's say you had a site that had news stories, and you selected news stories from a SQL Server, and it was select star from news stories where news ID equals 1 or 2. We would just say where news story equals 1 space, select star or union select star from whatever table and join them together kind of thing. And we would actually have that result set returned back to us. Now, if it's numeric input, you still have to validate it, and you would use things like isNumeric if you're using VB script for your ASP application, or nan or isnan if you're using JScript. So replace and isNumeric and nan, use those all the time, never accept user input, even with cookies, because I've often seen people pull in a cookie, plonk that straight into a request, and again, we can get access using the same just by manipulating our cookie. Now, further to this, we can actually use the properties. Defense and depth is always a good thing. So imagine you have used replace in everywhere you can think of, but let's say you've missed one small place. What we can do is configure Internet Information Server. By the way, although I'm using NT4 here, exactly the same, including the temporary stored procedures issue, is in SQL 2000, and the same with Internet Information Server 5, as well as with 4. So under here, we would change the RIS app properties. I'm going to do this real time so you can actually see the difference. Home directory, configuration, app debugging. Send detailed ASP error message to client. That is default. It's so much better to send a text message to the client. You can modify the message if you want. An error occurred on the server when processing the URL. If we apply that and go back and try any of these things we tried earlier, for example, just a single quote, an error occurred on the server. We don't get any of this information back. So there's two areas we can play with this. One, fix your ASP code. Two, configure the Internet Information Server to give very little information out. As you can see, error information can lead to a downfall, basically. So that's the other one. And of course, in terms of the temporary stored procedure, apply that patch, and of course, apply every patch when one comes, as and when one comes out. Okay, so are there any questions at all? Sure.
Is this related only to ODBC, or what if you use OLADB? Would you get the same?
Well, what you have is actually going down through the different layers. ADO will speak to the next level down, which is OLEDB. OLEDB speaks down to ODBC. So even though we're using ADO, you're still actually using OLEDB and so on. So if you're using different SQL servers, whether it be Oracle, there are still possible ways to do this. It's just I've tailored this talk specifically to SQL Server, Microsoft SQL Server and Internet Information Server, and it's a whole different story when you're talking about things like Oracle or MySQL and so on. Actually, MySQL is the best because it has very little functionality. There are no such concept as nested SQL queries, batching or anything like that. There are no stored procedures, so it's good that way. I suppose you could write your own function. Now this is working off the seats of my pants, I don't know this, but for example, assume we could create our own function that pointed it into libc, and we called, actually no, it wouldn't work because of the arguments, the way the arguments are being passed to the function. I was just thinking that if we created a function called system, we just specify the path to the SO file for libc, and then call system, which would give us XP_CMD shell. But I think they're actually passing a structure before before passing whatever we pass as our user input, to the function. So I don't think that would work. There's about 5 arguments, so no, that won't work. Any other questions? Sure.
Given that the command shell that you had on the SQL box, the SQL box and the web box are in the same box, are there any comments or techniques for other than being able to draw files, how do you actually get the output of commands back if you don't have a web server to serve it back?
Right. There's a number of ways we could do it. For example, we could redirect it to a file, yeah, and then create a new file that basically runs FTP commands, and then use the FTP client to drop us that file back out, basically. You could do it that way. You sometimes don't need the results back on what you're doing. What I suggested about the FTP client, we obviously just provide s::path to .txt file. But then if their firewall, if indeed they have one, if that's rejecting outgoing on port 21 rather, and rejecting incoming on port 20, then that would fail. There are ways to do it, but often you don't need the results back anyway. Any other questions? Sure.
How do you remove the temporary stored procedures? Clean out that?
Right, you can remove extended stored procedures basically with Enterprise Manager. If you did that, using the same technique, we can just put it back on again using sp_add extended proc. The only safe way to do it is to delete xp_sql70.dll. Unfortunately, that breaks the replication service within SQL. So you then got the other option, which is opening it up in a hex editor, and actually, because SQL actually will call load library xp_sql70.dll and then do a get proc address on xp_CMD shell, because that's the actual function it exports, yeah? So we could edit that in a hex editor, but then you might, if you ever had problems with it, Microsoft would say, nope, I'm not helping you with that, you've modified the binary. So you have to assess your risk. See, if you have a good, strong ASP application anyway, then you're not going to have this problem. But if you then want layered security, which is obviously the best way to do it, for example, someone makes a quick modification later on because something may have been broken somewhere and they forgot all about that. This error might, this vulnerability might creep in at some stage, so the best thing to do is have layered security. Apply the patch, that way no one's going to be able to get access to XP_CMD shell anyway. So there's a number of different defense strategies you can take, and obviously you have to assess the risk to say how far you want to go. If you don't use replication, for example, who cares? We don't need XP SQL70.dll, just whack it off the system and actually delete it, as opposed to sending it to the recycle bin, because there will be a way to bring it back again, kind of thing, if it's still somewhere on the file system, even in the recycle bin. So, sure.
If there are no more, I was wondering if you could do the field enumeration again, that field by field that you were doing.
Sure.
There's only two, but I didn't see exactly.
Right, let me just go and put this back the way it was. Yeah.
You didn't know the field names in your enumeration, right?
I didn't at the time. By entering the single quote first off, I got a portion. Yeah, I got and password, which gave me the first column. Now, once we have that column, we can then. So doing this again, single quote. %27 is a single quote, by the way. We get unclosed quotation mark before the character string and password. So we have password. We would then say group by password minus, and then we get column table users dot username. Yeah. Now, because I've only got two here, if I put username in here, we've worked out the other one. So we step through.
If there was a third one, you'd put in.
Put that one in, and exactly.
Once you put password, then
it gets the next one.
You just keep.
Yep. Sometimes you may miss one. I think it's based on the order of it comes in the alphabet, basically. So sometimes you may miss one, and you can verify that by simply saying, do a union select. Yeah. Now, if we said select star, and the two didn't balance, you would get a error message back saying you have to have the equal number of operators on either side of the union. Yeah. So we just go name, comma name, comma name, until we hit the point where we no longer get that error message. That then tells us that, providing they are doing a select star, that then tells us they have 17 columns in, if there's 17 iterations of name in the in our arbitrary SQL statement.
Can you list the actual table using SQL command?
If we're having a record set displayed back to us, yes, I could. The way this is set up, we're not actually being displayed the results. For example, if we had a book site that said select star from authors where author name equals Hemingway, yeah, and that basically brought us back a list of books written by Ernest Hemingway, yeah. What we could say is author name, equals Hemingway, single quote, union select, star from, or like whatever we wanted to select from the given table, and that would be returned in our record set.
So in this you could insert, add users to get into the site.
Correct. Oh, well, you say at best. I think that's a major problem. We can delete, we can up, we can.
You just do a select star from
users
on the back end of that guy?
I could do, but we're not going to get the. No, I can't, unfortunately. Select star from table users. That's all. If the query works, we're just going to be redirected to either the login succeeded or the login failed, because we're not actually getting whatever the result set back is. I'm sorry?
You don't have a way of returning the record set to the web server.
The record set is being returned to the web server, but the results of that record set is not being displayed in the ASP page. So that's
And if one do this and zero do that.
correct. Yeah.
And the patch that you set to
Correct. The MS0048 prevents the temporary stored procedures issue. Using replace or is numeric on your ASP pages on all user-supplied input, whether it be even a cookie, make sure you're stripping out all the dangerous stuff. And of course, you can configure Internet Information Server to limit extended error information. Error information is a godsend if you're trying to break into a site, basically.
The patch just fixes the no check on permissions on the temp stored procedure. It doesn't keep you from creating one.
Correct. But we can create a temporary stored procedure, but you can actually configure, take an account and say, I don't want this person to create a temporary stored procedure. You can do that as well.
I was just thinking if you could then just redirect the temporary stored procedure that did do the select splat from table name, just to get then to return the record set, rather than executing the command shell like you did.
Well, the record set is always being returned. It's whether the ASP page...
Redirecting you or not.
Yeah, if it wants to show you the result set. For example, if we're doing a search, it of course is going to show us the record set because we've just searched for that. That's not a helpful search page if they don't show.
Or the ASP that you're being redirected to.
Yeah. We wouldn't be able to, unless we had access to XP_CMD shell, we wouldn't be able to overwrite files. Is that correct? Using bulk insert and bulk copy, we might be able to do some stuff with that, although I don't know.
Or echo.
Well, echo would rely on XP_CMD shell, but using bulk insert and bulk, we might be able to do some stuff there. I'll have to think about that further. Any other questions? No? Well, last one. Sorry?
You mentioned that you had a paper on this?
Yes, it should be in your folders. And that relieves me today. Thank you.